It was the morning of my 43rd wedding anniversary, and the house felt wrong. Not wrong in a way I could point to: no broken window, no strange smell, nothing out of place on the surface. Just that particular stillness that settles into a room after someone has been in it and left quickly. My wife had been gone for 3 years, and I knew the difference between a house that was simply empty and a house that had been disturbed. This was the second kind. I stood in the doorway of my home office and looked at my desk. The papers were stacked, the same way I always stacked them. The pen was in the same cup. Every 3, but the small brass paperweight my wife gave me on our 20th anniversary had been moved 2 inches to the left. I knew because I never put it there. I always kept it to the right of the lamp, where she used to set it down after reading whatever I was working on, tapping it twice like a period at the end of a sentence. Someone had been at my desk. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer before I retired, and in that profession, you learn to trust measurements. 2 inches is 2 inches. I did not tell myself I was imagining it. I simply noted it, the way I would note a crack in a load-bearing wall, and I went to make my coffee. My son had called the night before to say he and his wife would be coming by for lunch. It was a Sunday in early November, gray and cold. The kind of day that makes the inside of the house feel smaller than it is. He had called it a visit, but there was something in his voice, a careful flatness, that I had been noticing for several weeks. The kind of voice a person uses when they are rehearsing. I want to be honest about my son, because this story is not about a monster. He was a good boy once. I coached his little league team. I drove him to college visits in 4 different states. When his mother was diagnosed, he came home every weekend for 2 months straight, and I watched him sit with her and hold her hand, and I thought, whatever else happens, I raised someone capable of that. I held on to that thought for a long time after she died. Maybe I held on to it too long. His wife was another matter. She had been pleasant enough in the early years, the practiced pleasantness of someone working toward something. When my wife was alive, the pleasantness had an audience. After she was gone, it faded the way a coat of paint fades when the weather turns. By the time of the anniversary morning, it was mostly gone. What remained was efficiency. She spoke to me in the tone of someone managing a complicated errand. They arrived at noon. My son hugged me at the door the way he always did. A firm hug, genuine in its mechanics, if not entirely in its timing. And his wife kissed my cheek and said the house smelled wonderful, which it did not particularly, because I had not cooked anything. I had ordered sandwiches from the deli 3 blocks over. We ate at the kitchen table. My son talked about his work in the way he had started talking about it recently, with a slight edge of grievance, as if the job were a person who had not been treating him fairly. His wife mostly watched me, which I had also been noticing, not conspicuously, just steadily, the way a person watches a clock when they are waiting for an appointment. After lunch, my son said he wanted to show me something in the backyard. He had been asking for months about the oak tree near the fence, whether I planned to have it trimmed, and I assumed that was the purpose of the trip outside. His wife said she would clean up and wait inside. That was the first arrangement that struck me as deliberate. Not wrong on its own, but deliberate. In the backyard, my son did not look at the oak tree. He looked at his hands for a moment, then at me, and said he had been thinking a great deal about my future. I told him my future seemed fine to me. He said he was not talking about health. He was talking about arrangements, about what would happen to the house, the accounts, the investments, in the event that I became incapacitated. He used the word incapacitated carefully, like a man placing a fragile object on a shelf. I asked him what had given him the impression that I was at risk of incapacitation. He said nothing had. He said this was simply practical planning. He said he had spoken to an attorney. Not his attorney, he was careful to say, but an attorney, and that the attorney had recommended a financial power of attorney document as a precaution. A reasonable precaution, he said, something that would protect me. I looked at the oak tree. It needed trimming. The lower branches were beginning to crowd the fence. I told my son that I had already handled my legal arrangements, that I had my own attorney and had done so for some time. I told him everything was in order. He nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they are not finished, only pausing. Then he said the document he had in mind was specifically about day-to-day financial decisions, and that it would simply allow him, as my son, to act on my behalf if something sudden happened. I said I understood what a power of attorney was. He said his wife had already drafted something, working with that attorney, and that it would only take a few minutes to review. I did not say anything for a moment. I looked at my son, and I tried to see the boy who sat with his mother and held her hand. He was in there somewhere. I could see the shape of him, the way you can sometimes see the shape of an old structure beneath new construction. But the new construction was what was standing in my backyard, and it was asking me to sign something. I said I would think about it. We went back inside. What happened next? I was not meant to see or hear. I had said I needed to use the restroom, and my son had sat down in the living room. I walked down the hall but stopped at my office door because it was ajar, and I heard his wife's voice. She was not on the phone. She was speaking in the low, rapid tone that people use when they believe they cannot be overheard, which is to say she was speaking at a volume that carried perfectly in a quiet house. She said, "The account numbers are on the second shelf. Left side," she said. "I found the investment statements," she said. "We need him to sign it today. Not next week. Today," she said. "Tell him it's just a formality." Then there was a pause, and she said, "If he won't sign it willingly, we'll figure out the other way." I stood in the hallway and I was very still. I am not a man who becomes loud when he is angry. I never have been. My wife used to say that when I was truly angry, I became very quiet and very precise, like a machine calibrating itself. I felt that calibration happening in my chest, a slow settling of components into their correct positions. I did not walk into the office. I did not say anything. I walked to the restroom, used it, washed my hands, and walked back to the living room. My son was holding a manila envelope. His wife came out of the hallway a moment later and stood near the kitchen door, with her hands clasped in front of her. She had a particular expression that I had seen before on people who had convinced themselves that what they were doing was necessary, and that necessity was the same as right. My son held out the envelope and said it was just the document for me to look over. No pressure. I sat down in the armchair across from the couch. I accepted the envelope. I did not open it. I said I wanted to ask them something, and I wanted them to be honest with me. They both said, of course. I asked whether they had been in my home office at any point during the visit, or at any point before the visit. My son said no. His wife said no. I nodded. I set the envelope on the side table. I said I appreciated them coming, and I said I was tired, which was true, and that I needed to rest, which was also true. And I stood up. My son started to say something about the document. I said I would be in touch with my attorney, and that if there was any conversation to be had about my finances or my arrangements, it would happen with my attorney present. I said this not unkindly. I said it the way I would state a measurement. This is where the wall is. This is its thickness. They left. I locked the door and stood in my living room for a long time. Now I need to tell you about the 3 months before that Sunday, because that is where the real story lives. My wife was a careful woman. She grew up with very little and spent her whole life making sure we would not end with very little, and she impressed that carefulness on me so deeply that after she died, I found myself continuing it not as a habit, but as a kind of conversation with her. Every financial decision I made after she was gone, I made as though she were sitting across the table, asking the right questions. About 4 months before that Sunday, I began to notice things, not large things at first. My son had started asking with greater frequency about specific accounts. Not in a rude way. In a way that could always be explained as concern, but the questions were becoming more specific, more technical, and they were being asked in a particular sequence, as if working toward a map. Then I had a conversation with my neighbor, a woman who had known my wife since before my wife and I met. She told me, carefully, that she had seen a car she did not recognize parked in front of my house on a Tuesday morning when she knew I was at my doctor's appointment. She had written down the plate number, because she was that kind of neighbor. She gave it to me on a folded piece of paper like a small gift. I did not run the plate myself. I took it to my attorney, who had been my attorney for 22 years, and who had known my wife, and who had the particular quality I prize most in people, which is that she told me the truth without decorating it. She ran the name connected to that plate through her channels, and what came back was the name of a notary. A mobile notary who specialized in estate documents and financial instruments. The kind of person you hire when you want documents signed outside of a law office, quickly, with minimal record. I sat in my attorney's office, and she and I looked at each other across her desk. She said, "You understand what this suggests?" I said I did. She said, "What do you want to do?" This is what I did. First, I moved. Not my residence, I moved my assets. Working with my attorney, I converted most of my liquid holdings into a revocable living trust that I had actually established 2 years earlier at my wife's suggestion, but had not fully funded. We funded it, all of it. The accounts my son had been asking about, the investment statements his wife had found in my office, all of it transferred into the trust. The trust had a successor trustee, not my son, not any family member, but my attorney herself, with instructions that were specific and documented and witnessed. A power of attorney, even a fraudulent one, cannot override a properly structured trust. My attorney explained this to me, and I asked her to explain it again, because I wanted to be certain I understood not just the conclusion but the mechanism. A trust owns the assets. I am the trustee, while I am living and capable. A POA grants someone authority to act as my agent, but my agent cannot instruct a trustee what to do with trust assets unless the trust document specifically allows it. My trust document specifically did not allow it. The accounts my son thought he had found were real accounts. They still existed on paper, but the balances had been redistributed. What remained in those accounts was enough to look convincing on a statement and not enough to constitute the majority of my estate. Second, I installed a small camera in my home office. It was not hidden dramatically. It was a small device that looked like a router, and it recorded motion. I had it installed by a legitimate security company, and I have the invoice. My attorney had explained that in my state, recording in your own home for security purposes was entirely legal, and that footage captured in your own residence was admissible as evidence of trespass or theft. On the Thursday before that Sunday lunch, the camera showed my daughter-in-law entering my home office. She had a key. I had given my son a key years ago for emergencies, and apparently the definition of emergency had expanded. She spent 11 minutes in my office. She photographed the investment statements. She opened the second drawer of my desk and examined its contents. She moved my wife's brass paperweight. That footage was downloaded and stored on a password-protected cloud account. My attorney had a copy. I had a copy. It was dated, time-stamped, and backed up. Third, I called my son's brother, my younger son, who lives in another state and who had been kept carefully out of whatever was being planned. I told him what I had found. He did not say much, for a long time. Then he said he was sorry. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. He said he would come visit the following weekend. And he did. Now we are back in my living room after that Sunday lunch, after the manila envelope, after I had said goodbye at the door with the same steadiness with which I always say goodbye. And I want to describe what I felt, because I think people who have been in similar situations will recognize it, and people who have not been will want to understand it. I did not feel victorious. I had not won anything yet. What I felt was a deep, heavy sadness, the kind that has no bottom, the kind that comes from standing in a room where something you loved used to be, and finding that the room has been repurposed. I had loved my son. I still loved him in the way that you can love the memory of a person while grieving the person they have become. Those two things lived in my chest at the same time, and they were both real. I also felt clear. The clearness that comes when there is nothing left to wonder about. I knew what had been planned. I knew what had been done. I knew what I had done in response. The only remaining question was what I would do with what I knew. I called my attorney that evening. We spoke for 40 minutes. She recommended a course of action, and I agreed with it. The following Friday, my son received a letter, not from me, from my attorney's office, on letterhead, delivered by certified mail, with return receipt requested. The letter stated several things. It stated that his entry into my home on Thursday of the previous week, without my knowledge or consent, had been recorded on security footage and constituted criminal trespass. It was not his entry, it was his wife's entry, but he had given her access to a key that was given to him for emergency use, which made him a party to the trespass. It stated that any document purporting to grant financial power of attorney over my accounts or estate, regardless of my signature, would be challenged on the grounds of undue influence and elder financial abuse, and that my attorney had already filed a protective notice with the appropriate county registry. It stated that I had restructured my estate, and that the accounts they had been documenting no longer held the assets they believed them to hold. It stated, finally, that I was prepared to treat this matter as a serious legal proceeding or, alternatively, as a painful family situation that could still be addressed through a different kind of conversation, one that happened honestly and with proper legal representation on all sides. The choice of which path to take was theirs. My son called me that same evening. His wife was not on the call. He called from his cell phone, and I could hear in his voice something I had not heard there in a long time, which was the sound of a man who has run out of directions and stopped moving. That particular quality of stillness. He said, "Dad." I said, "I know." He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, and I believed some of the times he said it. He said his wife had presented it to him as protecting me, protecting the family, making sure things were handled properly before something happened. He said he had told himself that was what it was. He said he had done a very thorough job of telling himself that. I said I had raised him to know the difference between telling yourself a story and telling the truth. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said yes. He said yes. He knew. I told him this, that I was not going to pretend the previous 3 months had not happened. I was not going to hand him a document and say we were even. What had been broken between us was going to take time and real work to repair, and I did not know whether it could be repaired fully, and I would not lie to him and say otherwise. But I told him I was his father, and that I had been his father for his entire life, and that I was not prepared to be finished with that. I told him the door was open. Not wide open. Open in the way of a door that requires the right kind of effort to walk through. He came to the house 3 weeks later, without his wife. We sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and talked for 2 hours, and neither of us said everything we were thinking, and both of us said some of it. And that was enough for a beginning. I want to say something about the particular loneliness of being in my position, because I do not think it is talked about enough. When you are an older person and the people around you begin to see your life as an arrangement of assets rather than a life being lived, there is a temptation to start believing them, to start seeing yourself as a problem to be managed, a house to be maintained, an account to be monitored. That temptation is quieter and more dangerous than any legal document. My wife resisted it her entire life. She was 71 years old and making plans for the garden when she got sick. And she kept making plans for the garden even after the diagnosis, because she was not a woman who organized herself around what might be taken from her. She organized herself around what she intended to do. I think about her in the garden a great deal these days. My younger son helped me rekey the locks the weekend after his visit. We ordered pizza and watched football, and did not talk about his brother very much. And when we did, my younger son was generous in a way that I noticed and was grateful for. He did not tell me what to feel. He did not tell me what to do. He was simply present, which is sometimes the most useful thing a person can be. The brass paperweight is back to the right of the lamp, where it belongs. My estate remains in the trust. My attorney reviews it annually. Everything is documented, structured, and witnessed by people who have no interest in it beyond the professional and the legal. If something happens to me tomorrow, The instructions are clear, and the assets are protected, and the people I love will be taken care of according to what I actually wanted, not according to what someone convinced themselves I would have wanted. The power of attorney document that my daughter-in-law drafted, with its careful language and its neat signature line at the bottom, was never signed. It sits, as far as I know, in some file somewhere, a document that describes an outcome that did not happen. That is all it will ever be. There is a moment I return to sometimes. I am standing in the hallway outside my office door, and I am hearing my daughter-in-law's voice, and I am understanding what is being said and what is being planned, and I am feeling the ground shift slightly beneath everything I thought I knew about my family. That moment was real. That ground shift was real. I do not pretend it was not, but I also returned to another moment, which came about 8 months later. My son came to the house with a contractor, because I had finally decided to have the oak tree trimmed, and the two of them argued pleasantly about the best approach for 20 minutes, while I watched from the back porch with my coffee. My son does not know how to be the person he was trying to be. He does know how to be my son. When he forgets the difference, I remind him, and so far he has been willing to be reminded. That is not resolution in the way of movies or simple stories. It is resolution in the way of real things, which is to say it is incomplete and ongoing, and sometimes uncomfortable and still, on balance, worth the work. My wife would have had thoughts about all of this. She would have been furious at the trespass, and clear-eyed about the motivation, and harder on our son than I have been, because she was always the one who held the line when I was inclined to soften. She would have also, eventually, said what she always said after a long and difficult conversation about something that mattered, that the people worth keeping are the ones who can still surprise you in the right direction. I am still waiting to be surprised. The door is still open. The tree looks much better now that it has been trimmed. You can see the whole yard from the porch, all the way to the back wall where my wife planted the roses that somehow, for reasons neither I nor the contractor, nor any reasonable theory of horticulture can explain, are still coming up every spring. I do not understand it. I have stopped trying to understand it. I just go out in the morning with my coffee, and I look at them. And I think about all the things she planned that are still happening without her. And I think that is not such a bad kind of legacy, all things considered. That is the thing about careful people. They plant things that outlast the planting.